welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. This is episode number 484, and as part of the Experience Project, today it is myself and Steve talking about clothing systems for backpack hunting. We cover the gamut, everything from underwear to puffy jackets, rain gear, accessories like belts, and a whole lot more. This is a long episode, and if you check out the show description, we do have timestamps so that you can jump to certain sections in this conversation if you're only interested in hearing about mid layers, for example. So this conversation isn't just about making specific recommendations on brands or specific pieces that we use, though we do mention some throughout this conversation. The goal of this podcast is to look at a high level and understand layers that are needed, layers that aren't needed, how different layers can work together, what decisions we make based on conditions or time of the year, and a whole lot more. We also have a video that goes along with this podcast, which is a shorter, more condensed version of this discussion, as well as links to some previous podcasts that go in depth on things like rain gear, conversations with other guests that we've had on in the past to talk about technical apparel, and a whole lot more. So be sure to check out the link in the show description to go to the Experience Project website, where you'll see the video, this podcast, other podcasts, links to specific items, and all that. It's a one-stop shop for you. Before we dive into today's conversation, if you are enjoying the podcast, it would help us tremendously if you can leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app you use, or even just share the show with a friend directly. We'd appreciate that. Right now, let's go ahead and dive into this conversation on clothing. All right, Steve, let's talk clothing and rain gear today. We have videos accompanying this podcast conversation, two separate videos, one going over rain gear specifically and talking about the specific rain gear that we're going to use and test as part of the Experience Project on all three of our hunts this year. And then a separate video just going over clothing, layering, that type of thing. So again, just to recap, this podcast conversation is going to be a longer take, you and I talking more off the cuff, and then there's the more condensed videos to check out as well. But we'll do rain gear last. Let's start with clothing. And for simplicity, we could go next to skin and work out. We could go top to bottom, bottom to top. How do you want to tackle clothing?
Well, we shot the video last week, and I remember just not improvising the whole thing, but I had laid out all my clothes and like, well, this will be easy. I'll just talk through each piece. And I started with socks. So let's start there.
Let's do it.
Feet to head and just kind of work your way up. Yeah.
So what do you do for socks? I know it's going to be essentially mostly darn tough, and you've talked in brief. I think it's worth mentioning again in case people didn't catch our very in-depth boot conversation about having different types or cushions or thickness levels of socks to accommodate not only weather conditions, but just fit of footwear.
Match the sock to the boot or shoe of your choice and the insole. You need to go out and hike with these things on very uneven terrain prior to your hunt. I can drastically, and I mean drastically, change how a shoe feels by changing the sock. It's not a subtle little thing. It's like when you were just out here testing out some boots a couple weeks ago, and you wore real thin socks and didn't like the boot, and you yourself said, "Man, if I don't throw that away, because I think if I had a thicker sock on, this would change. It would completely change how that felt, because there was too much volume inside the shoe. Your foot was sliding around." Took you on the sheep hike, which is like all side hill, straight down, straight up. It's very taxing on your foot. And yeah, a thicker sock, you just want to fill up. If you've got more volume inside your shoe, you want to fill it up and I like to have, in an ideal world, I'm wearing like a medium cushion sock, something that's got some padding, some warmth to it. I find better results from blisters and hot spots with a little bit more cushion in there versus too thin of a sock, but certainly just depends on the shoe choice, what I'm running. And then, so order, go online, go to anywhere, REI, Cabela's, anywhere that's going to sell quality merino wool socks. You did definitely merino wool sock is what my default has been. Darn Tough is the specific brand that I wear 99% of the time. And they just come in different thicknesses and weights. They'll be called light cushion, regular cushion, full cushion, max cushion, and order, have one of each. And then when you're going out on your training hikes, definitely just test out different ones and run a different sock on your left than on your right and see if you can feel a difference. And reiterate that you can't throw a pack on and hike around your neighborhood and feel this difference. Like you have to get side hill. If you're, I think I remember throwing this out a few years ago. If you live in somewhere completely flat, if you've got canals, go walk the canal bank, go out of your way to walk miles and miles on uneven ground where every step your foot's trying to slide inside your shoe. And that's where you start seeing the difference. If you're just, wearing them to work that day or hiking your neighborhood or a flat trail, you're going to be hard pressed to see the difference. But that's not even remotely close to what it's going to be like when you're out there hunting.
Yeah, I mean, what you just mentioned about me testing that boot on the sheep hike and not being satisfied with how it performed, at least on that day with those socks, is a good contrast to the night before I had used those same boots and hiked on a trail, a pretty, even trail, not rough terrain, etc. Like it had some elevation, but not very steep. And the boots felt fantastic. They felt great. But once you got off trail, once you got super steep, once you start side hilling, that's when you know everything. So yeah, socks. I'm super similar to you. I think it's worth kind of reiterating Darn Tough. You and I both mentioned them a lot, but I think we've maybe glossed over brands partially because we're not about brands. But just to touch on a few things with Darn Tough, this isn't about them again. The Experience Project's totally unsponsored. I've never spoken with anyone from Darn Tough ever, so it's not a commercial by any means. But since we've said it so often, the reason for me is they make a good quality product. They make it in the USA. They do last, but they're also backed by a lifetime warranty. And above all that, they're one of the manufacturers that does what you just talked about, Steve. And they're very clear with their different, like what they call cushioning, which equates to thickness. So it's easy to go, hey, I want to try a lightweight or an ultralight or a midweight or a heavyweight, and to have all of those options is just really nice. So they make it easy to have options. They're super high quality. I actually just recently, for the first time ever, sent a pair in for warranty. That was hassle free. So yeah, they've just been cool. Again, not affiliated with them, but just some of the reasons, at least for me, that I've chosen Darn Tough kind of more than anything is they've been great, and I don't have a reason to change.
I've tried other socks and nothing's held up remotely close to the Darn Toughs. For me, 100% everything you said, but also just the performance of them. They last, they hold up. They're, yeah, just better than anything else I've used. The only other thing with socks is we've highly talked about, like, do not use insulated boots. So in cold weather, ideally you can run to a little bit thicker sock for warmth. Just pay attention that if you're trying to jam your foot with a really thick sock into the boot and there's not room inside the boot for that sock to expand, if it's getting really compressed, that'll actually make your feet colder. You just got to pay attention to that. Ideally, you want, this sounds, the warmest footwear combination I've ever had is a really thick wool sock inside of Crocs. Like you can go out in some really cold weather. And that sounds silly, right? Like, what do you mean you're wearing Crocs? Like there's nothing there, but Crocs just have a ton of room in the toe and everything.
Yeah.
And you can put on I've got some really thick, Darn Tough socks that is like your feet will be toasty warm in that combination. Um, and that's just because the insulation's allowed to expand and it just do its job.
Let me ask you two quick things. We can do this quick, but I'm sure some people are wondering about two things. One is liner socks, two is toe socks. Do you
Mm.
use either? Why or not?
I've been messing with toe socks. I haven't found a toe sock that I love. The from that they're yeah, they're nice on the toe, but I don't like anything else on the sock as far as how it's built. The Ingenie is the one I've used, and that was just off of your recommendation. I've got a couple pairs, wore them on the death hike this year. Uh, Really, yeah, they're great. I just don't like how yeah, I don't use them for hunting unless I know I'm going somewhere that's going to be really, really rough on the feet. And then it's one that's, I've got one pair of toe socks and two or three pairs of darn toughs that I could alternate between. I've never used a liner sock, but I know you did this year on the death hike, so you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, they're somewhat similar. The liner sock and the toe sock, meaning like this year's good death hike's a good example. I wear a very thin liner toe sock. So I don't generally wear a liner sock at all. They definitely have, I know guys personally who swear by them to reduce friction and blisters with their hunting boots. I just have never had the issue and don't go to it. The toe socks I find helpful, similar to you, Steve. I don't wear them hunting generally, but something like the death hike where you're just on your feet so much. Um, you just want to prevent friction, toe rub, etc. Just because, we're moving so much. um, Feet swelling, different things like that. So I found them helpful for that. Um, yeah, I forgot that I did that, the liner and the toe sock were one and the same for me on the death hike. But well, that's what I did. A very thin and gingy toe sock liner over a lightweight, darn tough sock. Worked fantastic on the death hike. I actually broke all of my rules I normally preach and never changed my socks one time on the entire death hike and never had a single issue. So it works well, but it's not something I generally need or use for hunting.
Yeah, one other thing. It's amazing once you start talking about stuff. Waterproof socks. I've dabbled in them. I think there's some potential in there. I don't have enough to really offer valuable input. I bought some. This was just last year. I bought some from a company called Showers Pass. Read a bunch of reviews. Got some elk hunted with them. I was out for a week and wore them on a few different days with just a completely, basically a non-Gore-Tex running trail shoe, and it was a pretty awesome combination. The shoe itself, I crossed a couple creeks, and it kind of held on and retained that moisture, so that was kind of annoying, but it worked. My feet weren't overly sweaty. I'd say no more, no less than just being in a Gore-Tex boot. Definitely something I'm going to continue to play with. I just don't know exactly where it fits into when I would take it versus just having a Gore-Tex boot.
Yeah, the shower pass stuff, I've messed with the what's the other one? Seal skins, I think.
Hmm.
The waterproof socks that I've tried. And then also another thing in this category would be a VBL, vapor barrier liner. And those come in, there's some sock forms, but some of them are just booty forms, meaning it's not, yeah, it's a liner. It's a booty that you can essentially add for cold weather and moisture management. So it's the technical version of if when you were growing up, you went and played out in the snow and your mom put a bread bag over your foot. It's that. It's preventing moisture, like say snow, if you're doing a late hunt, lots of snow, it's preventing that moisture and cold from getting into the foot. So, yeah, it's a vapor barrier liner between usually socks. So a lot of times guys will wear like a liner sock, the vapor barrier liner, then their standard sock, and then obviously the boot. So if you're doing extreme conditions, either in moisture, you can look at waterproof socks, or for moisture and cold, do some research on the vapor barrier liner. Again, nothing you and I have extensive experience with, Steve, yet, partially just because of we've had good fortune of managing those conditions in other ways. But yeah, definitely something that I would like to learn more about, get more experience with if I ever need it.
So moving up, you're gonna go right to long johns.
aka fishnets.
Fishnets are, you're not too far from it with your Cincy Designs ones. I love long johns. I pack them more often than not. If the temps are going to be freezing or below, I'm always taking them. I've got buddies who their legs just run hot and they don't pack them hardly at all until it gets really, really cold. I definitely, when it's, the lows 32 or below, then I'm taking them for sure. And definitely tried different ones over the years, merino wool, whatnot. For, it's been, gosh, quite a long time now, but been running these ones from a company called Brynja, Brynje, and they are essentially fishnet. They come in a polyester version and a merino wool version. I I love them. They're awesome. They breathe really well. They provide a lot of warmth. They kind of act like all the moisture can escape from your body, so you're not getting clammy. And then there's so little fabric in contact with your skin that when your pants are completely soaking wet, you don't feel that wetness isn't directly against your skin. And it's really, really nice. And they're super light being fishnet, obviously much reduced in the amount of fabric that is needed to build the garment. And I got nothing but great things to say about them. Highly suggest buying them. I believe last year was the first year or second year you've had those Cincy design ones, which is Polar Tech Alpha, correct?
Yeah, it's just what they call naked Polartec Alpha. So there's no shell. It's essentially it is similar in a way to a fishnet. It's a porous fleece, highly breathable, but very warm. And yeah, they're great as well. I struggle with long johns regardless of the type in terms of using them as much as I think I would like to, but also trying to avoid the hassle of them. Meaning, obviously, there's full zip on, zip off long johns, particularly merino and synthetics, which I like the ease of on and off, right? You don't have to take your boots on and off, etc. And I think I would use long johns more if I was using a full zip style, but I also don't like the weight of many of those offerings, right? It's like the weight of a full merino zip off long john. And so I tend to stick to something lighter and more breathable, like these Alpha Direct long johns from Century Designs. But I will say that I definitely don't use them as extensively just because they're less convenient, if that makes sense. When do you use yours most, Steve? Like, you're just starting the day with them and then taking them off? Like, I know that's a
Yeah.
nitty-gritty thing, but if you're hunting in cooler temps, what does your use of them look like?
Yeah, I'm definitely sleeping in them. And then as put my pants over them, and then at some point during the day they come off. Yeah, if it warms up. And that's the one thing I really like about those in particular, the Brynja ones, is that you can really do quite a bit of hiking, and it could be, it could start warming up into the 40s or maybe low 50s, and depending on your activity level, you don't have to take them off. Where other ones I've used in the past, it's kind of like climbing up the mountain chasing after an elk, and you're like, okay, I got to stop right now and take these long johns off. I'm dying.
Yeah.
I've not had those with the Brynja ones because they breathe so well that you can really kind of push past that point, and then obviously you're going to want to take them off eventually, but it's not a physical effort got so high that I got to take these off now because I'm sweating.
Yeah, I tend to sleep in mine partially just to get my dirty pants off, or, if they're dirty and wet, my primary pants, keep them out of my sleeping bag, things of that sort if needed. But just, I find it amazing putting a quote unquote fresh layer on in at night is so warm and comfortable and just very satisfying. So I definitely sleep in mine quite often, and then it depends on the weather for sure, but most of the time I'm just taking them off before I leave camp because when I'm moving, my legs stay pretty warm for sure. So yeah, they definitely have a place, and in a perfect world, I could keep the something like the Brynjas or something like those Cinchi designs, the Alpha Direct long johns I have, but have a zipper, and still keep that weight down and make them easier to use, more versatile would be fantastic. But that doesn't exist yet that I've seen. So maybe someday it's coming. Primary pants then, Steve?
Yeah, I think here's a good place to back up to and just talk about. I started out the video this way. Just let's talk about camouflage versus solid colors.
Okay.
I think it's when you're buying stuff, are you relegated to only what the hunting clothing companies offer and their specific camouflage? Obviously, I think it's changed a lot. If you asked this question 10 or 15 years ago, everybody, the vast majority of people would be like, "Oh, you're crazy. You need camouflage. You need this and that." And I just think slowly people started wearing, more and more solid colors, and now there's not near the pushback that there was. To me, camouflage, and I don't care what, if it's Sitka or Kuyu or Mossy Oak or whatever. There's some better ones and bad ones, but it's 98% in aesthetic, pleasing to the human eye, doesn't really move the needle on why you're out there hunting in the field. If I had to list 100 things that I have to go right for me to kill an animal, but right, 100 things that are going to help me kill an animal, camouflage would be 100th on that list. It's really, really low down for me. I've seen, I specifically talked in the video about, was when I was in the Frank Church on my sheep tag, I was wearing this blue sun hoodie and it was super, super hot. And I love that sun hoodie for hiking when it's hot. And hiking up a ridge, a bull elk is on this ridge and it's like a pretty long finger ridge, and at the top of it's 10 yards, 15 yards wide. It's not very wide. I'm going up, I look up, and there's a raghorn bull coming down the trail, and he catches movement. I'm looking at him, I freeze, and he just stares at me at 20-ish yards, something like that, 25 yards, stares at me, and then eventually goes, "Yeah, you're nothing." And I'm just staying, there's nothing between him and me. Just there's a few lodgepole pines around, little small ones, but nothing that he's got a direct line of sight at me. And then he just proceeds to walk by me at three yards away, and never gave two craps that I was there until I was trying to video with my cell phone, and he kind of got completely perpendicular to me, and then he caught a little bit of movement, and then he ran 20 feet, 20, and stopped and looked back at me like, "What the heck was that?" And I joke that if somebody was behind me filming and I was wearing the latest and greatest camouflage, they would be, "Oh, that's proof that our camouflage is amazing. Check out what this elk didn't even see me." And I'm
Mm-hmm.
wearing brown pants with a very blue t-shirt on, long sleeve hoodie. And to me, it was just very good proof of, like, as long as you're not moving, they don't really care. And you're already pretty broken up with your backpack straps and your binocular harness and everything that yeah. So going back to clothing here, I just absolutely do not think camouflage needs to be a purchase decision for you. If you can find, and actually I'd prefer that you just go with solid colors, because we can wear them year round. Like the Prana Stretch Iron, such a great example of a pant that was designed by a yoga company that I don't know how many thousands of hunters are wearing. They just come in some solid colors of a blue and a brown and some light tan, and it's been fantastic. It's a pant it's like $70 versus some of the hunting companies are charging $150 for the same pair of pants. And you can wear them, year round when you just walking around town. I mean, obviously some people wear camouflage in town, but it looks a little silly in my opinion. So it's great to support hunting companies, and obviously all the camouflage companies now, Sitka, First Light, Kuyu, they're all coming out with solid colors. From a marketing perspective, they do want you to buy into, hey, our camouflage is the best because it's the only place you can get it, and then you continue to buy those pieces. But then they 3 years later, they're going to come out with the next latest and greatest camouflage. Um, First Light just did this, their new Western pattern. And I mean, it's all just variations of the same damn theme. Um, yeah, my spiel on camouflage there. Do you agree or disagree?
As a consumer, I look at it less from does or doesn't it help, does or doesn't it benefit the hunter camouflage. And my feelings are there are few situations where it can help. And by help, it may just buy like an extra couple moments of confusion or concealment or something. But again, it's so far down on the list of movement, scent, even things like where you position yourself, what's behind you, right? That's going to help break things up. Being in shadows or sun, that's going to help bring all of that is way more important than the camouflage. So purely from a customer perspective, if we can let go of the need for camouflage, that just opens up the door to so many different clothing pieces, right? If you just take
Mhm.
camouflage off the table, it's like, yes, I can support these hunting companies and I'm glad to do so, but I can also shop from so many different places, so many different brands. And especially when you are in this process of either starting and money is tight or you are exploring what you do and don't need and do and don't like. So, for example, if you don't know what puffy jacket you want yet. You don't know what pants you want yet. You're not sure what features you want, how warm them you want them to be, how cool you want them to be. If you can try different options at a decent price point, you can just learn a lot more and get a lot more experience, right? So, yeah, I just love primarily the fact that it opens up this door to more options, generally much better pricing, etc. And yeah, it's just as you said, Steve, also just more year-round use, especially when it comes to the higher dollar stuff, right? Like your puffy, your rain gear, all that, man, it would be, from my perspective, a shame to have to spend really good money on something and then wear it essentially, you know, depending on the hunter, anywhere from like 1 to 6 weeks a year, right? So yeah, I tend to agree. And we'll leave a link in the show description as well, just to give an example of some budget options, right? There's a when was this article? Back in 2022, but I think still relevant. I had some comparisons on budget items versus more premium items. And it'll just give you, I think, some good examples of what those price differences look like, what type of savings you can get if you're on a budget, and really how all that adds up to. You can start from zero to a backpack hunt, and in terms of clothing, you can do that for a few $100s, starting from zero. And typically, if you're going to go on the hunting side of things, you may be looking to spend $250 to $300 on a single piece, not a full system. So, yeah, again, we're beating the dead horse. We love hunting companies. We love that hunting companies giving back to the community, etc. But at the end of the day, we have to have more options. And if you let go of camo, you can have more options.
I think another area to talk about is clothing was a tricky one on outlining this whole project as far as the gear portion and going through what matters, what doesn't matter. And sure, you don't want to go out in the field in cotton pants and cotton t-shirts, but you don't have to go spend just basically what you're saying. You don't have to spend $1,000 on clothing because whether I went to Walmart and bought some Wrangler, those stretch Wrangler pants that are $25 and a polyester sun hoodie that's going to be $30 and like a mid-weight grid fleece thing. I'm sure you can, I know there's that one on Amazon that you found that was super like $20.
Yeah.
I could go buy all that stuff and do these hunts and be just as comfortable. Maybe the durability isn't there. The
And
clothing, you're
fit
beating the crap out of
and
it. Yeah,
yeah.
fit and a few little things like that, sure.
Yep.
But they're not None of those, I could do that and not change the outcome of my hunt in the slightest way. But the only thing I
Mhm.
can think is if the pants didn't fit well, it'd be super annoying when you can't step up and over a log and they're binding on you and things like that. But you don't, yes, there's certain elements you need in clothing, but those elements don't necessarily have to be expensive.
Mhm.
Rain gear is its own separate. There is no such thing as cheap rain gear that works. I've yet to find that. But as far as what pants, base layer, mid layer, even, Costco has some down jackets that are crazy cheap you can get that would work just as well as others. So it's not, if it's an area to save some money or you're on a budget, you need to kind of check off these basic tick marks on, all right, no cotton, just to go through the list, but you don't need to spend a ton of money.
And you may not need to spend money, period. Meaning, I mean, I've had this conversation with guys of, hey, I'm going on my first backpack hunt, high country mule deer or elk or whatever. And they're assuming that they have to go buy hunting clothes. And they're doing that without considering, oh, actually, maybe I have stuff in my closet that I can actually already use. So not only is it potentially cheaper, it's potentially zero, right? Of throwing together, most guys have some sort of like decent active pants, even though they're not hunting pants. And same for like sun hoodie, those types of things of, yeah, it's maybe you are more set than you think you are if you let go of this idea that you need quote unquote hunting clothes, whether those are in camouflage or not. Maybe it's just a solid from a hunting brand. Yeah. So yeah, many, many benefits to opening that up.
Okay, pants. Pretty
Pants.
simple for me. I don't need one. I want fit is if I got to be super picky, fit is a big one. I want the pants to fit at the waist, not be restrictive when I'm hiking, not be too baggy and loose though at the same time. I want them to be made out of nylon in my experience. That's been the best, most durable. I want to be pretty dang thin. So obviously balancing durability with being, too thin. But I really don't, when it's hot, I really don't like overly thick pants. And even what a lot of hunting companies call early season pants, you get them and it's like, these are not early season pants. These are pretty thick and heavy. But I want them thin for breathability and then also drying out. If they're good and thin, you walk through some wet grass in the morning, 30 minutes later they're completely dry. If they're kind of a mid-weight, a little bit thicker, that drying time can double or triple. So I want them thin for that reason. Pockets, I don't like overdoing on pockets. You don't need 17 cargo pockets and this and that. I just want one cargo pocket, and then you got your normal hip pockets. If you'd be real picky, you want your hip pockets to work, to be sized appropriately, to be able to put a rangefinder or a phone in your pocket and not have it be, not have to feel that phone in your pocket. Um, and then if it's a hunting specific one, this doesn't really exist outside of that. Hip vents are great. That's one feature that relatively new, 5-ish years, but I really do like hip vents. And then the biggest one is like what Prana did with that Stretch Zion is a built-in belt into those pants. If we're backpack hunting, you've got a backpack on, you've got a waist belt cinched tight around your waist. To have pants that require that where the fit isn't dialed, they stretch out over the course of a hunt. The If you have to wear a belt, which is almost all pants, I've yet to find a pair of pants that don't really require a belt because that would be like full custom sizing, and even your body's gonna, you could probably lose 2 inches around your waist over the course of a long hunt. That you need a built-in belt. So those are all the things I'm looking for in a pant, and I guess this is as good a time as any to mention. So Outdoor Vitals is a clothing company out of Utah. The owner is a hunter, super cool dude. They've got one of the designers on staff is a hunter, and I reached out to them, gosh, a year and a half
It's,
ago,
yeah, longer than that, I
at
think, when we
least.
first started talking.
Maybe it's been 2 years. Yeah. Basically said, hey, if I sketched everything on a napkin, like here's my very simple, basic what I want in pants and a jacket. Would you guys want to build it and work together on this? And they were all jumped on it right away. And we've been working on it now for on these hunts. We'll have pants and a mid layer and a puffy jacket that we're testing where it's 100% them. We just kind of have our fingerprint on these are the exact features that I'm looking for, uh, with a heavy focus on simplicity and keeping things lightweight and just functional. So these pants, everything I mentioned, these pants we've got, they're nylon. They've got a great fit. They've got a single cargo pocket. They've got good hip pockets. They've got a built-in belt, hip vents. They're fantastic. All the pairs, we've gone through a lot of revisions of them, and even the first one to the latest one, we've messed around with fabrics and fit and things like that, and they've all been fantastic. Definitely, really excited to get those out there for people. But everything will go. It's not EXO related, and it's not like for sale on our website or anything like that. Everything will go through them. But yeah, those will be coming hopefully next spring is the
Hmm.
goal. So
Pants are definitely an area where I see it get too cute, right? Like too much going on, too many features, too many pockets. And, maybe that's just my personal preference or your personal preference, but they don't need to be really creative. They just need to be executed really well. Good fit, good materials, and essential like storage. Yeah, I'm excited about the Outdoor Vitals pants. I will say, just jumping back to belts, um, this is something I personally have experience with and then have recommended countless times to EXO customers, is if you have to have a belt. So you're using pants that you have to have a belt and you've tried this, you've tried that, it doesn't work, it doesn't stay up, it's not comfortable with the pack, etc. There is a belt company called Arcade Belt. It's a very soft, stretchy, yet supportive belt. And it would be the top recommendation that I have if you have to add a belt to your pants. I mean, I know you have Steve, like we've made belts, we've used paracord. So I'm not saying it's the only option, but in terms of an off the shelf, you have to have a belt, I would check that Arcade Belt out again. Don't know those guys, not affiliated with them, but I've used one a lot and dozens and dozens of customers have used them successfully as well. So you just, especially with a pack, have to avoid anything bulky, anything even close to rigid. Yeah, so it's just a no-go, and that Arcade Belt's the best recommendation I can give you.
one other concept I forgot to talk about, going back to clothing as a whole. From a lightweight backpacking perspective, I think clothing is very often overlooked. You're comparing weight of stoves and weights of backpacks and weights of every piece of gear we're throwing in there. And clothing just kind of you don't people don't pay attention to it. And you could probably pack the exact same stuff, different companies and have a 3 to 4 pound variance in what you're packing with you if you're kind of on the low to the high end, right? Puffy jacket, long john, socks, underwear. I mean, everything adds up. And it's interesting on clothing because a lot of times they don't even list the weight. So they're starting to, but it's not consistent of what something weighs in a size. You generally are going to say size medium, sometimes size large, what that piece weighs, but it's not super consistent across from company to company, even taking the time to list this weight specs of things. But it's something that I personally early on I just like, well, clothing is clothing. You can't change the weight of it, right? Like I don't know why I thought that, but then eventually started, well, wait a minute. I've got this down jacket that weighs 20 ounces and this one that weighs 14 ounces. They're pretty similar in warmth. One's just got more zippers and pockets and features. So, clearly for me, I want to take that lighter jacket. And then you can do that with, pants could weigh 8 ounces, they could weigh a pound. You can really have a huge range there in the weight of the clothing. something just to pay attention to, just be aware of when you're selecting items. Something, one of the fingerprint things we've got with Outdoor Vitals here, that it's like, okay, making sure that everything has kind of a weight goal that we're trying to design to, and essentially it's as highest performance as possible in the lowest weight. Talked about pants, underwear. Kind of skipped over that one.
Oh yeah, of course, right? Before we get to long
I'm not
johns,
all
you
free
probably have
balling out there. Yeah.
still something under them.
What
Uh,
do you got?
you know what I'm gonna say because I wear the same underwear for everything outdoors at this point for the last handful of years. There's a company called Exo Skin, not affiliated with Exo Packs, which is EXO, but this company is just letter X, letter O, XO Skin. Um, I don't remember how I first found them, but tried these boxer briefs from them, and just personally absolutely love them. And yeah, that's all I use anymore for hiking, hunting, etc. I in the past have used quote unquote hunting brands, right? Like I've done that whole thing. I've done merino. Before these exoskin ones, I just was using a lot of Under Armour synthetics. Um, so yeah, I just prefer a good fitting boxer brief that's not going to move around, not going to ride up, that's gonna breathe well, dry well, and just fit great. And for me, merino was always a struggle. I didn't find it comfortable. It doesn't dry well. It stretches out. It can shave. There's a lot of people who swear by merino underwear. I actually don't like them. Out of all the different ones I've tried, I don't prefer them. So, and then some synthetics do better than others in terms of stink factor. But yeah, once I tried these exoskin ones, that's all I've been wearing. So that's a kind of a short, easy answer for me on, again, not just, okay, I'm wearing these, but what am I looking for? It's moisture management and killer fit and ideally lack of smell.
Yeah, I'm with you on merino. I've never found a pair I like. That again, they're generally, when merino gets that thin, they're not going to be durable. They stretch out. Yeah, just never found a pair I like. I don't actually don't think they're a very good material choice for boxers. I just wear some Adidas brand generic mesh ones that I've had, bought 20 pairs over the last 10 years. They just work for me. You do want to, sounds silly, but it does matter. Like, you don't want to go do a hunt in a brand new pair of boxers that you've never hiked in before, because you just don't know what kind of chafing there is or isn't going to be. So definitely get a pair of boxers, just like your socks or whatever, and go do training hikes in them. Go get sweaty and make sure that, you know, things aren't rubbing. And then the waistband, of going back to what we were just talking about with belts on, don't wear a belt on pants. You do want to make sure that the waistband on your underwear basically just doesn't fold over and kind of roll over on itself very easily, which is going to create pressure point rub spots on your hips. There's, I can't say I've seen anything consistent. Sometimes the Adidas ones I have, they don't have a lot of structure. There's nothing special about them, but they just work. I've seen other ones with like very stout waistbands that work, but then the next one was like a stouter kind of elastic waistband is going to cause rubbing and cause issues. So it's just something probably you need to match with your body and just go test and find out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, the Under Armour, I think they're called Boxer Jock that I've worn a ton are very similar to the Adidas ones that you have. And I know that because I accidentally came home with a pair of your Adidas boxers one day and I've never given them back to you. Um,
Sounds a little weird.
it sounds weird, but yeah. How many times does that happen where you and I have been together and end up with each other's socks or something? Going to tops, Steve, and
Well, puffy
you know,
pants. Well, I guess that's insulation. You want to go to that later?
um, well, okay. So one thing we skipped over, we dove in, and we've obviously backtracked. As you can tell, this is a very conversational podcast. As we start talking about each piece of clothing, it's really all about, especially we've talked about keeping things light. It's all about the versatility of these layers. So we're not even necessarily saying on every hunt when it comes to bottoms that you need 4 pieces, that you need underwear, long johns, pants, and puffy pants. And we'll talk similarly on the tops about all these layers. These are all arrows in the quiver, right? These are all tools in the toolbox. They work together and they can be combined effectively. But based on the conditions you're going into, don't default to thinking you have to have all these. So I know we kind of mentioned this with long johns. There's plenty of hunts you may not need them, period. And then, yeah, we can talk about puffy pants. Again, you don't need them on every hunt. The goal with layering is to have effective layering that works together to manage temperature and moisture and keep you comfortable uh, in certain conditions. And so just keep in mind as we say all these layers, we're not saying you need all these layers for every single hunt. These are all options to think through. So that being said, yeah, let's hit puffy pants while we're talking about bottoms and layers and talk about when we do take them, the benefits they provide, what we're looking for, etc.
Puffy pants are amazing. I don't take them if it's going, it needs to be below freezing and a type of hunt where there's going to be a lot of sitting and glassing. But when you do have them and you got to sit down and I did very vividly remembering a mule deer hunt. I've mentioned it a couple times. It was the same hunt where my the tread on my boots on those Scarpa boots froze, and it was so single digit temps. And we puffy jacket, puffy pants, puffy gloves, and I was amazed at how long you could sit in a spot with all those layers on, and pick apart a hillside and glass. So they are fantastic. I take them as a tool to be able to sit out there longer and glass longer. They don't take them as a comfy thing to have around camp, whether they're nice, but um, I've got buddies who pack puffy pants. Boschma does. He packs them. He's got 0% body fat and he packs those things even on like a 50-degree night and wears them and likes to be cozy and comfy in them. Um, I don't use them like that. I'd use them just when it's really cold. But they're incredible to have. There's so many, if you really step back and think about how much, there's a lot, like puffy pants didn't exist in the hunting market
Yeah.
10 years ago. I mean, maybe just starting to come around somewhere in that time frame.
Hmm.
They're relatively new, but they are, when it's cold, they're incredible to have. That they add a lot of warmth. We are actually uh, Outdoor Vitals is designing some puffy pants. It's a little bit separate from the project we're working on with them, but also we have prototype ones that we're taking on. I'll have on the hunts this year, and obviously it's got to be cold enough to justify taking them. I am thinking about using a. I've always used puffy pants and puffy jackets to take our sleeping system down colder. So taking the Catabatic 22-degree bag and taking it down into single digit temps with puffy pants. This year, if it's going to be kind of that marginal, if it's going to be high 20s uh, for the low, maybe taking my 30-degree quilt and then taking puffy pants and the weight penalties. I mean, probably 4 ounces to go with that combination. So I think I'm going to give it a shot and see how that goes, just depending on what the weather looks like. But just a way to, you want to be thinking about the ways to add versatility to what's in your backpack, and this is definitely one of those areas where it's a very small weight penalty for a lot of versatility potential.
Yeah, puffy pants, to use your favorite term, is that just can be a game changer, right? Again, I'm not taking them on every hunt, but man, when you are on those cold hunts, you're sitting and glassing. If you're talking something that can make you a more effective hunter, puffy pants can do that in certain ways. Just the ability to sit, stay patient, to not get weathered out, to have more concentration, to be more comfortable, and really to stay in the glass and stay in the game, it can make a massive difference. So it's an area of clothing that in the right conditions and on the right hunt can, I don't want to say make or break things, but can make you more effective for sure. Um, yeah, so they're fantastic. Definitely an area where um when you get outside of the hunting space, I think this is actually a good example where the hunting companies have done a pretty good job here. With some of the design elements of puffy pants versus some of the non-hunting companies. So the use case of puffy pants for hunting, as we've talked about sitting and glassing, is you're taking them on and off. So full zips, not having to take your boots off, etc. That's a must in my opinion. But also the sizing to situations where you're putting these over your primary clothes. So they do need to be cut a bit larger and have a little bit more volume. Whereas there are plenty of puffing pants on the market from non-hunting companies that either don't have full zips or some that do have full zips, but they're more of a tapered trim cut. And for the specific use case of taking puffy pants on and off over your primary layers for glassing, they're just not going to work well. Um, and so this is, again, just an example where I think there's more good options from hunting companies on puffy pants than sometimes look into the non-hunting companies that offer puffy pants but don't fit our specific use case very well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So four pieces on the bottom, Steve. We got underwear, long johns, primary pants, puffy pants. I would say most archery seasons, I'm only taking two of the four. Well, actually a fifth, which is rain gear, rain pants, but we're having a rain gear conversation later. So potential of
Okay.
5 layers on your bottom. Archery season, I'm typically only taking two of those, depending on the conditions, of course. You start getting to October, I'm often taking three of those. And then some cold hunts could be taking four of those. Cold and wet hunts could be taking five of those, right? So again, five total options, but depending on the season conditions, etc., maybe taking as little as two of those.
Yeah, that's just what my arsenal is, and I can take that from August through December.
So let's, as we go to tops, let's quickly, I think, hit what the layer options are and then maybe back up and talk into each one of them, right?
Okay.
So essentially, base layer, and I think we can redefine that term a little bit because to me, a base layer isn't just a base layer, it's my primary hunting shirt. We can get into
Hmm.
that. So, base layer, mid layer, which is generally going to be a fleece of some sort, insulation, which is going to be a puffy jacket of some sort, and potential rain jacket slash wind shell of some sort. So for me, those are four primaries that are are really in my arsenal. But then this is an area where things can get overly complicated for some hunters, and they start looking at, well, what about a soft shell? What about a vest? What about a rain jacket and a wind jacket? And so there's definitely more than 4 layers that can exist here. But from a backpack hunting context, effective layering and versatility, I think those four that I just mentioned again, base layer, mid layer, insulation, rain slash wind shell, those four are really the important pieces to consider. And some of the other stuff, vests and soft shells and other types of jackets and what have you, for a backpack hunting context, are generally for me very hard to justify.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a vest in the kind of the shoulder, if pretty warm conditions where you don't need a puffy jacket. So you've got your base layer, mid layer, and then you just put a vest on if it gets a little chilly at night. So that would be you wouldn't take your puffy, you take the vest. And then the soft shell jackets, they're just really heavy. And if you just took the majority of them on the market, the insulation value for the weight is not there. And they have this really awkward place in my mind. So great for day hunting and things like that, but I've never found one that I would even consider packing on a backpack hunt. Not to say that that doesn't exist out there. I'm not really even looking at this point because I just don't see a use for one.
Let's start next to skin then with base layer. I don't know if it's just me. When I hear base layer, I think for some people
Long Johns, yeah.
yeah, they think that has to be a layer under something. That has to be the foundation. But there's so much time that I spend on hunts and quote unquote my base layer or my next to skin layer, which is really just my primary hunting shirt. And yeah, two big considerations, merino, synthetic. I have worn both extensively, have gone back and forth over the years, significantly. Do see some pros and cons, for each, for sure. But especially the last 3 to 4 years, I've spent very little time with a merino top, a merino base layer, and most of the time in a synthetic. And for me, that boils down to quick drying, comfort. And so merino, yes, has insulative properties when wet, but I do not like the drying time and the clammy feel that often retains with that. So even though it's insulative, I don't find it comfortable to wear merino when wet. And there's been issues that I've experienced with things like fit and durability as well. And on the flip side, synthetics, I feel like for me anyway, the odor management, which is a huge benefit of merino, right? Odor management. The synthetics have done such a better job with odor management and treatments and the effectiveness of those treatments in the last 5 years. So there's certainly been in my history synthetics that I couldn't stand to be around myself because they stunk so bad after a day or two. Um, but with things like Polygene and some others, those treatments for me have worked effectively. I will say I have heard that there's individual variability on the effectiveness of some treatments that synthetics use. So something like Polygene, I'm not diving into the science, won't pretend to know it all, but from very reputable people, I've heard, hey, Polygene flat out doesn't work as effectively for some people. I don't know if that's a chemical composition of their sweat or something like that, but for me, it works well, and I can go on a 7 day hunt with a synthetic with Polygene and not stink myself out terribly. So, yeah, for me, more recently, synthetics. Not saying they're perfect, not saying that they're for everyone, but that's the direction I've been going.
Yeah, I wore merino exclusively for a lot of years and then stumbled through the death hike on sun hoodies. The one a Patagonia Capilene sun hoodie is the one that I started with. And hiking in heat, they are incredible. And now I found a Cool is a company, KUHL, that does, outdoor recreation clothing. They have kind of what I would say is like a mid-weight sun hoodie. And I've been wearing that for all my early season stuff for quite a few years now, 3, 4 years. And then I'll now go back to merino when it's cold. So I'd say
Mhm.
when the highs are in the 40s and it's, yeah, single digits in the teens. I do like merino for its insulative properties, and I will wear that in the colder temps. And then when the low is freezing and the high is 60, 70 degrees, then that's when I'll change over to that synthetic cool hoodie. I love having both. I like that arsenal. I like the option. When it gets really cold, I'll pack an extra very thin merino wool crew neck long sleeve shirt from Icebreaker that I really like. And yeah, it's feel like I've got great options there, and I just adjust as the weather dictates what I need to pack.
So, two things to me on most hunts that I really want in this base layer. Well, actually, three things. So, a good fitting hood, a good ventilating chest zipper, and thumb loops. I find all those to be very functional, and I miss them on most hunts when I don't have each of those three. But I know, like for you, example with the air cool, like it doesn't have a chest zipper. Um, you don't find that to
Yeah,
be
I
something
could.
you really care about.
Oh, yeah, a quarter zip to vent the chest. Yeah,
Yeah.
I those breathe so well, you don't need it. And unless it's really, really hot. If it was really hot, I'd appreciate having it. But the goal there is to keep the sun off of your skin. So yes, it's
Hmm.
nice to open that up and dump out some heat, but it's not as needed. I do like that with merino wool pieces though. I've got a Canis Gear has a really nice long sleeve merino hoodie that has a quarter zip on it. Definitely good to open up and vent out the heat. The thumb loops I could care less about. And then a good fitting hoodie. I'm curious your definition of that. I want a very loose hood when you're talking about when it's warm outside. That's why I'm wearing a sun hoodie so that
Hmm.
it's covering my ears and neck, but also airs are allowed to get in and out of there. I've got some Outdoor Vitals has a sun hoodie that I've got, and it's a very tight fitting hood. And to me, that's counterproductive to what I want for a sun hoodie. Now, yeah, you change that over to I'm wearing it in colder temps, then yeah, I want a hood that's a little bit more snug, and the goal is to hold the heat in.
Yeah, it's similar. Yeah, I've just some sun hoodies have a massively oversized hood that I find annoying because it's like it's so big that it feels floppy. Sometimes in a breeze, it feels like it's moving or it gets in like peripheral. But in general, I also, yeah, don't want something super snug because I want some ventilation. So yeah, I'm kind of like, at least on my spectrum of all the sun hoodies I have, I'm somewhere in the middle of like, I want some ventilation, but I don't want it overly loose or overly baggy. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, just
Okay.
having it's nice. This base layer, the sun hoodie, whether you go synthetic or you go merino, doesn't matter, but it's definitely a place where you have a ton of options on the market, especially if you open up yourself to non-hunting brands. I mean, there's everything from the generic super cheap stuff on Amazon. I've used like I just blanked on it. The Outdoor Research
Echo?
Echo hoodie. I've used that one extensively. You can find those on sale quite often. Steve, you mentioned that Cool brand, KUHL, the Air Cool hoodie. I spent a ton of time in the Sitka Core Lightweight, which is great, but it's obviously coming at a premium. So there's so many options on this piece in particular that some of the hunting brands do it incredibly well. Like you mentioned, Canis as well. They have great stuff. And then there's just going to be a ton of budget options and general market options as well. Mid layer, Steve, what does that mean to you? What types of pieces do you use? What are you looking for?
Obviously, mid layer is it's identical into the base layer. It's long sleeves. It's definitely going to want a quarter zip. It's got a hood on it. We're just changing the material here to something that's thicker, that's going to provide some more warmth. Depending on, if I just had one, yeah, it's just something that's kind of a mid-weight. I like the Polar Tech Alpha stuff is awesome. The grid, I like a grid fleece. There's a merino wool company out of California called Ridge Merino, and they've got a hoodie that I've worn for quite a few years. I mean, I know nothing about the company other than I just think I saw an Instagram ad. I was like, oh, that looks good. And it's a merino wool that's kind of got a grid, fleecy lining to it. I believe Polar Tech makes that as well. And it's been fantastic. It's super light. You're 10 ounces or less, I believe, for that. A lot of versatility there. I like a mid layer to be able to be worn on top of a base layer, or also I like to hike with that as just my only layer. So instead
Hmm.
of base layer and mid, I'm just wearing the mid for it. I like that. It's 35 degrees and I'm somewhat active. I like that versatility and also can use that to if something's wet, my base layer is wet and I just want to take it off and throw it in my pack or hang it up in a tree to dry, then I've got that other option. So I don't want that to be so thick and heavy that I can't wear it as a standalone piece. Yeah, this is an area where it could be 9, 10 ounces, or it could be 20 ounces if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say with merino, especially when you get into mid layers or heavyweight merino. And we haven't touched on this yet, but there's plenty of items that are called a merino whatever, right? Merino sock, merino underwear, merino base layer, doesn't matter. But it's a merino blend. And so it's not 100% merino wool, which has advantages. But I will say that when, in particular, if you start getting into heavier weight merino pieces that have a high concentration or high percentage of merino, they do get heavy quick. So if you're looking at mid layers and you're going to like these expedition level merino pieces and they're truly either 100% merino or very high merino, they can get deceivingly heavy very quick. Whereas something like these merino blends, which that ridge piece you have, Steve, I know is a blend, and I think I mean, it's less than 50% merino. Um, it's going to be much lighter while still having some, when you mix those synthetics in, you're getting some more durability, you're getting some more stretch, you're getting some more active stretch, meaning the piece moves a little bit better. There's actually gonna be less stretch in terms of merino losing fit, if that makes sense. Um, and then you're just gonna save some weight as well. When I hear base layer and start to think of mid layer, and mid layer could be merino, Polartec Alpha, traditional fleeces, grid fleeces. There's a lot of options out there. This is definitely an area where I picture somebody starting their hunt, leaving the truck, leaving the tent, and potentially getting themselves in trouble strategically. And there's a very common mistake. And do you know what I'm getting at, Steve?
No?
Starting warm.
Oh, oh. Yeah.
It's a cool morning. You're gonna start hiking, and it feels so good to have this mid layer on, or potentially even a jacket on, like a puffy on, and you start hiking, and 200 yards later, you start getting warm, and you either need to stop and take something off, or you're gonna keep pushing on, and then you're gonna get yourself sweaty, and you are setting yourself up for discomfort later. So we've said this many times, but it's something you just have to make the decision, especially on like these pre-dawn mornings, these cool mornings when you're hunting and you know you're going to be hiking. You have to force yourself to start chilly. And so sometimes that means, hey, it's only in the 30s and all I'm wearing is my quote unquote base layer or my sun hoodie because I know I'm going to be hiking and I know I'm going to be warm soon. What I will say is I I've found that to be more effective to wear my lighter layer shirt, but also because it is cool to have potentially my beanie and or gloves on because those are super easy to take off. But I find that they help keep me a little bit comfortable and warm for those beginning cold temps before I really start hiking and heating up. And the great thing about those items are you can take them on and off while you're hiking and at least on our packs quickly store them in like the side stretch pocket, for example, versus when you have these extra tops on, these clothing layers, you have to stop, you have to take your pack off, you have to take some time to shed layers. And a lot of people don't want to do that, so they either start comfortable and get too hot, um, and then, find themselves sweaty and uncomfortable later, or you just have to convince yourself to start a little bit cool and know that you're going to warm up.
Yeah, every time we're like hunting in a group setting, there's always somebody that's like starts the hike off. And if you know you're climbing and you're going to be doing some physical exertion, uh, just you got to tough it out for 5 minutes till your body heats up. But you're going to be way better off starting in your thinnest, lightest layer and just dealing with that for that little bit because it's a lot better than overheating and having to stop and then take your pack off, take your bino harness off, untake your puffy off, put your puffy in your pack, put everything back on. Like just start cold and you're gonna be way better off. And certainly a strategy kind of along those lines I'll use. If I don't pack rain gear more often than not. 90% of the time I'm not packing it unless the weather's, obviously it, there's no excuse anymore because with the invent of if you've got an inReach, you can check weather, and get pretty accurate forecasts. Obviously, you're in mountainous terrain, it's not going to be perfect, but you're going to know if it's going to rain or not, and it to where you do need to pack it. But if you get caught in that surprise rainstorm and it's not super cold, if it's raining, it's going to be above 32 degrees. I will get in my thinnest, lightest layer that has the best chance of drying out and just hike in that and be cold for the next hour or whatever. But all my other clothes are in the pack, staying dry, and then I'll just hike and move around and be chilly for the 30 minutes that it rains or the hour that it rains. But then when that stops, I'll probably just keep wearing that layer until it completely dries out, and then I'm good to go and nothing else got wet. Versus if it starts to rain and you don't have a rain jacket, but you put on the thicker layers that you have, once those get wet, they're going to take a lot longer to dry out.
Yeah, mid layer again. This is a place where you can spend a ton of money, uh, get kind of the new latest and greatest stuff, which, I have them, I like them. Something like the Sick Ambient's a great piece, or you can do what we mentioned earlier. There's something called the Condor Grid Fleece, and it's Amazon, so pricing changes, but they're regularly on Amazon for 25 bucks. The fit's not the same, the function's not the same, but I would not hesitate to go on a backpack hunt and take that, $26 grid fleece. If that's what I needed, I'd go hunt, I'd be effective, and it wouldn't matter. So, not saying that there's no benefits to the other stuff, but the mid layer is definitely an area where you can spend 20 plus bucks or 200 plus bucks in a lot of ways. So yeah, just think through that, figure out what you need, look at your budget, make some decisions. Going to puffies next, Steve.
Yeah.
There is, I think, a lot more variability in puffy jackets than at first glance. It's easy to throw out this term like a puffy jacket and not think critically or do, I think, some like comparisons and understanding of the vast differences in performance. And along with that, of course, like weight on puffy jackets. So, talk a little bit about maybe some of the stuff you've used from the light end to the warm end and the variability that you see for people who look at this category and think, oh, it's all the same. It's just a puffy jacket.
To me, puffies kind of fall into two categories. You got your lightweight one, and then your kind of later season, really cold one. There's some crossovers in the middle, but for the most part, you kind of fall into those two spots. For I'm always trying to save weight, so I've tried to make the lightweight ones work. There's just such a to get it like there's only so much you can do with the fabric. So to get lightweight, you're just taking away down, and they're really just substantially not as warm. And I've found with Outdoor Vitals, we're obviously doing a puffy jacket, and instead of trying to hit the lightweight ones, which are going to be 11, 12, 13 ounces, I said let's make the jacket 16 ounces, but put as much down in there as we practically can to make it as warm as possible. I felt like if you're putting a puffy jacket on, you can never be too warm. And they really have a really wide range of the, if you're not moving, you can put on a pretty burly puffy jacket and not overheat. And so it's like if you're putting on a puffy, you're not active, you're sitting there, you're glassing, you're eating your dehydrated meal. It's first thing in the morning, you're making your coffee, whatever. It's not a piece that you're actively hunting in. So you can't really have too warm of a puffy, but then also you can obviously go too far with that and go to the first one that comes to mind is like a First Light Chamberlain, which is a really like very warm puffy, a lot of down in there, something that you would want to take when you're talking about like zero single digit temps. But for your average hunt where it's, in the 20s, that to me, a jacket, at least the one we're building with Outdoor Vitals, 16 ounces, as much down in there as possible. It's like a really good happy medium.
Some of the questions that get brought up with puffy jackets in the context of hunters specifically would be noise and durability, are two complaints that I see. And I sometimes wonder where they're coming from because going back to the point, there's few times and instances where I'm moving in a puffy. Um, I'm not saying there's not extreme cases, there's not incredibly late season hunts, etc., where that matters. But in general, I think it's overemphasized as a concern when people look at noise and durability on a puffy jacket, simply because it's most of the time for a backpack hunting context, you one are trying to save weight, therefore you're going to go with some lighter fabrics that aren't going to be as durable and that tend to, have some swoosh to them. And you're concerned with hunting, but it's like you're using that generally when you're glassing, not when you're making an approach or a stalk, etc. So this is an area where I don't know. I just feel like I see it a lot in questions and concerns with hunters, but don't fully agree that those should be two primary concerns. Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm with you. A puffy jacket is a static piece. You're in general not going to be doing physical exertion, as we just talked about. If you're wearing one and you start climbing up a hill, within the first 10 minutes, you're taking that thing off. They don't breathe. I mean, their whole goal is to retain warmth and keep you warm. It's not an active layer at all. I could certainly, yeah, there's times when we're get up from glassing and it's super cold and like, oh, we're going to go hike a mile over to this next glassing spot and it's side hill or downhill. Then yeah, I'll keep the puffy on and navigate that. But yeah, the concept of something that's super durable, not or noisy, just not really too much of an issue for me.
Any features in a puffy? Like obviously hood can be important, but it's overall pretty simple. I think simple pockets, some puffies I see doing thumb hole loops, different stuff like that. Or you just like simple, streamlined and warm.
It's as light as possible. Yeah, streamlined, simple, warm. That's all I'm looking for. Again, I'm not doing much in it. I'm sitting there glassing, so I don't need it to do much other than be as lightweight as possible. So when it's in my pack, it's not, taking up, adding a bunch of weight to it, and then take it out and just provides warmth. And then one thing you want to do with a puffy jacket is if you're someone who's between sizes, always go up. You're only making the jacket colder if it's tight fitting. You want nice and loose and baggy. Going back to like our sleeping bag podcast, you want all that down to be able to expand out to its max capacity. If you're wearing a puffy and it's really tight against you, it's getting compressed. It's not adding this amount of warmth that it possibly could.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to mention that sleep system podcast because what we're not getting into at this current moment is down versus synthetic, types of down, quality of down, etc. We talked all about that in that sleep system podcast in terms of sleeping bags and quilts. There can be some nuance between that conversation for a sleep system versus for a clothing piece like a puffy jacket. But in general, if you want to hear, more of our thoughts on down versus synthetic types of down, fill power, etc., I think let's just point people to that conversation because we went into that in some depth there. Number four of the four kind of key layers would be rain gear. You tackled rain gear separately in the video, Steve, from the primary clothing system. So let's get into a little bit about that before we do talk about what we are doing with rain gear as part of the experience project this year, and then maybe some of the specifics of the gear that we're testing.
Well, to start with, I think there's a rain gear is waterproof to a point, and there's a lot of things that I don't fully understand hydrophobic versus hydrophilic versus, there's a lot of different things going on within rain gear to make them resist water, but also breathe. I can just say as a fact that the lighter it is, the less it's going to keep you dry. I've not seen an example yet of one that is lightweight, but also keeps you dry. You'd think, simple logic would be, I bought a rain jacket. It's waterproof. It doesn't matter if it's 8 ounces or 2 pounds. It's waterproof. I could stand out in the rain all day long and stay dry. And that is not the case. They are just waterproof to a point, and then they do fail. Once the DWR fails, they stop breathing, and then you get clammy on the inside. I think one of the biggest issues is getting the moisture that's inside out. If you could imagine if you just wore a trash bag and you hiked up 1,000 feet up a hill, you could probably take that trash bag and dump water out of the inside of it if you could kind of find a way to collect it. I think the amount of moisture that's coming off of your body, perspiration, is substantial. So you can't have something that's completely just full on waterproof and that air can't escape it. So that's where it gets very messy on what's the waterproof ratings are and breathability ratings are. And we did this podcast with Marcel from Canis Gear a couple of years ago. I'd honestly have to go back and listen to it to get a refresher course on everything we talked about. But just you and I have been in the field in very wet conditions and a lot of different companies, rain gear, very high end stuff, and have all had them all fail at one point or another, where you're it's still keeping kind of water off you, but at the same time, it's very clammy and very damp on the inside of it.
Yeah, there are, as you mentioned, like standardized ratings for waterproofness and for breathability. There can be two separate numbers. Most rain gear, higher quality rain gear companies are publishing those both in and outside the hunting industry. Um, I've heard within the hunting industry, sometimes those testings are happening on non-printed fabrics, like non-camouflage fabrics, and that can change from the dyeing process, and actually decrease breathability, for example. So yeah, I would just say if you're really interested, you're comparing rain gear, you're getting ready to spend some money, look at those numbers. That's not the only thing to look at, but definitely be aware of what those numbers mean, and what those rates mean and how they're established. And then, one very simple thing with rain gear I think can be overlooked is the difference between the membrane and just like the DWR. So the DWR, durable water repellency, is going to be a finish. It's a chemical treatment essentially to the fabric. Think of like the first layer of defense in terms of moisture. That's what you see happening when water beads up on the surface of something. The DWR is helping that water to bead up and not essentially begin to penetrate into the fabric or soak into the fabric. So that's one. And then two would be the membrane, which is one of the layers of this rain gear system. And again, different conversation. There's multiple layers of different types of rain gear. Some are, 3.5 layers and some are less, etc. Those are two different things. They both serve a purpose in trying to establish breathability and moisture resistance, but they're just very different. And I guess what I'm getting at is understanding those is things like cleaning your rain gear and taking care of your rain gear, washing your rain gear can really help that DWR. So those things do matter. Washing your rain gear, drying your rain gear, help keep the DWR clean, help keep the DWR functional, which is offloading, to use a non-scientific term, some of the demand from the actual membrane on doing its job. So if you have old rain gear, I mean, we kind of had this conversation with like sleeping bags and the performance of down and how taking care of them and cleaning them actually can change and help performance. It's very similar with rain gear in that sense. And then also, and we got into this a little bit with a somewhat recent podcast with John Barklow, is when it comes to DWR, there are regulatory changes in process that are changing the types of chemicals that are being used or allowed to be used and sold with DWR. And essentially, the chemicals that are being phased out are what make DWR as effective it has been. And some of the new more environmentally friendly alternatives are just not as good performers. And so there's changes going on with rain gear, with DWR, and you can look at some of that. But it'll be interesting to see where things go. As you said, Steve, with rain gear, there's just always trade-offs to consider. You have competing goals, competing variables of keeping this thing breathable so you're not just completely wetting from the inside out. And at the same time, trying to have it be waterproof from the outside and not let that moisture get in. And then just things like even durability, packability, weights. There's just a very broad spectrum of quality, performance, budget, weight, etc. And it can be tough to not get overwhelmed making decisions on rain gear. It really can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And so that's one of the things with rain gears because they're tricky. So we've got four different sets: Canis, Kuiu, Sitka, and a company called Rab. We've got four different sets of rain gear that I went out and got that are trying to focus on that lightweight. So that I think the heaviest jacket's 16 ounces, the lightest is 12, just right at 12, maybe 11.8 or something like that. But definitely erring on that lighter side. And then we're just going to take all four of those sets with us on all three of the hunts, just kind of pass them around between guys and just have an end of the season kind of review cap of how they all performed and did one excel over the other.
What did you see in the video? I think you threw all those sets on the scale, not only the forward taking, but also just as a comparison. I think was it the First Light Omen that you compared to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like a 2 pound difference between jacket and pants between the average of these lighter sets to the Omen. So it's substantial. It's a big weight penalty to pack that stuff. But that stuff is, to First Light's credit, absolutely phenomenal. If you're going to be hunting in very, very wet conditions day in, day out, I don't think there's anything better, at least not that I've found. I'm sure Sitka and Kuiu and these other companies have something that competes with it, but I've used that. It's awesome. Yeah, it's really, really good stuff, but it's quite the weight penalty. And definitely, you know, one of those areas you could skimp and save the couple pounds. What's that penalty going to cost you when you need that rain gear to work? I don't know. That's why we're doing the review.
Yeah, and for us, this review's all Alaska context, right? I mean, you
Yeah,
mentioned this in passing before, but how many times are you packing rain gear in Idaho?
yeah, yeah, very rarely.
It's just tough because rain gear fails for different reasons. None of it's perfect. A lot of it's expensive, and depending on the hunt and what you're doing, you may rely on it very extensively, or you may not need it at all. And it's a very difficult gear choice, or can be, of
Yeah,
like, man, do I really need this? Do I really have to spend this money and pack this around? And can I get away with something light, or do I need the additional durability and performance? And yeah, there's definitely not one easy answer here.
no, and it's certainly not. You could go to Walmart and buy Wrangler pants and be just fine. You can't go to Walmart and buy rain gear and be just fine. That doesn't exist. Yeah. It's you to have good quality rain gear costs, they're expensive to make and you're going to pay for it. And that's the bummer is if you're on a tight budget and you go spend $500-600 on a rain gear set, you could also just not extend your pack the entire hunt. You never pull it out. Like, man, that was a waste. So it's tricky.
So those are kind of the key four layers on the top. Again, there's other layers that people employ, specific wind shells, soft shells, vests, etc. Um, we can leave those there. I think for the versatile backpack hunting context, I don't say rarely have a place, but certainly something we rarely use or need or even consider taking. Again, for that backpack hunting context. So one final call out category, Steve. We've mentioned a few things just briefly, but anything accessory wise, we talked about belts, very minor. We've mentioned hats and gloves, but anything that falls under that category, gloves is obviously there's probably the most to talk about there, just because there's a bunch of options and conditions matter. What type of gloves make it into your pack based on the conditions?
Yeah, my favorite glove is just a mechanics wear. I think it's called Fast Fit, and it's kind of a leather, fake leather on the inside. It's actually really nice because it's touch screen compatible, so you can operate your phone with it. And I just use them not necessarily for cold weather, but just for navigating difficult terrain. When you're in really rocky country and you're frequently climbing up stuff and grabbing onto rocks, or Kodiak when you're climbing up the hill and you're holding on to the brush and you got thorny objects everywhere. I found myself packing those a lot, and they work for keeping my hands warm, when it's chilly, but I don't, when it gets cold, then I switch over to a rag wool glove. So I'd probably pack both of those gloves in that scenario. And I really do like having the rag wool gloves for cold weather. They're absolutely phenomenal in warmth. They're super cheap. You can go get them. The pair I got, I think I bought like 4 or 5 pairs, maybe from Sportsman's Warehouse quite a few years ago. They're like 10 to 12 bucks a piece. Um, Little grip dots on the inside of them for gripping things. They're awesome.
And cold weather, extra cold weather, getting more stationary, puffy gloves can be huge when you're sitting
Yeah.
glassing, much like the pants. Again, not something that applies to every hunt, but one of those things that really are so stinking helpful on those really cold hunts. So that's another consideration. Um, yeah, I mean, that's generally going to be it. There's certain use cases for extra waterproofing gloves, and this gets, for us into our Alaska context and even the packraft hunt on the Caribou is just having a true waterproof layer. It was relevant for me on my sheep hunt as well. And there's different ways to accomplish this. I will say it's been an interesting learning process for me over the years, primarily with hunting Alaska and Kodiak and understanding that everything about warmth, breathability, and moisture also ties over to gloves, meaning you can have a very warm, waterproof, non-breathable glove, but if you push it too far and you then get sweaty, clammy hands, then it can be tough to deal with that as well. So gloves, I don't want to say it's the same as footwear or the same as clothing layers, but there's certainly, I think, some intentionality into choosing the right glove for the right context and then knowing when to use it and what the limitations of that glove are, if that makes sense.
There's definitely something there in you talk about not getting your hands clammy. I think that's why the wool does so well, is that it breathes so well and your hands don't ever get that clammy, cold feeling to them.
What are the gloves? I always blank on the name, but that were you're specifically taken for the pack raft.
Yeah, Showa SHW, or sorry, SHOWA 282 is the glove name, and they're $34 on Amazon. I haven't used them yet, other than bought them, and they're like, man, these things look awesome, and then they come recommended from a bunch of people.
A ball cap and a beanie. I don't know if you overthink it on headwear, but to me, like with those two, I feel like, and then combined with the hoods we've talked about and some of the layers, like pretty much all I'm ever using for every condition. But also, it's a beanie is like critical for cold weather, but I'm also taking it on pretty much every hunt because just those chilly mornings and things like that.
Yeah, I don't take a beanie on every hunt. I just, if it's, it's probably the freezing levels when I take one or not take it. Granted, they're only a few ounces, but I'll just reuse my mid layer hood, or the hood from my puffy jacket or whatever. But definitely, I just like a lightweight. I've got a pile of beanies, but just my favorite's a merino wool, pretty thin one, stretchy. Uh, yeah, not, you can definitely overthink a beanie, but they're great to have when it's cold.
One other accessory I just thought of on this ever increasing length of podcast, we had no idea it would take this long. Gators. When are you using gators and when are you not using gators?
I only use gaiters when I have to. It cracks me up. You'll see a dude archery elk hunting in Idaho in September, and it's 70 degrees outside, and he's got gaiters on. I I they're really, going back to like footwear and footwear breathability, they really choke off a lot of that. No heat can escape out of the top of the shoe. They're covering up, usually mid shoe and up, so they're really cutting down on how much air the they're really cutting down on how much your foot's going to breathe. And I just don't take them unless really it's got to be snowy conditions. I'm not worried about a little dew on the grass, or if it is September archery elk and the grass is dewy in the morning, it's also going to be 65 degrees in a few hours. Everything's going to dry out. Going back to, I like to wear thinner pants so that they do dry out quick. Um, Up in Alaska, they obviously have their place and going to be much, much more frequently used. When I did, probably for this caribou hunt, I'll do the same thing. Katula makes some really cool short zip-on gaiters, and how I used them was basically put my shoe on, or put a sock on, made sure the sock wasn't a super tall sock, just kind of a mid-height, and then put shoe on, and then put the gaiter on, and I put the gaiter on um, basically next to my skin. So I made sure the sock was below the top of the gaiter so it couldn't wick moisture down into my foot. And then put that gaiter on, and it has a little cinch, so it goes right next to the skin, and then put my pants over the top of that gaiter. And that worked really, really well for just walking through the wet grass and jumping through little creeks here and there. That's one common thing. It's a 2 years ago, I did a real late season hunt, and I was in knee deep snow for a lot of that day, and I had waterproof, good Gore-Tex boots on, good Gore-Tex gaiters, but still my feet were completely soaked by the end of the day because from my knees up was getting wet, and then that moisture is just wicking all the way down the pant legs to my sock and then inside the boot. So it's something to be aware of, and that's why I was running that combination of basically I have the gaiter right next to the skin so nothing can wick down into it. And it works really well.
Man, that was a lot. Hopefully people found that helpful in the timestamps because we'll have those for the show to be able to skip around and jump into certain sections that people want to jump into. Before we wrap that up, obviously we have the shorter, more condensed version in the videos, and also people can see more in that. But hopefully, some of what we've tried and learned and applied over the years for backpack hunting in terms of clothing has helped you guys out. Again, I just think simplicity and versatility, have a layering system that works for you. It doesn't have to break the bank, and you can do more than you think you can with less. I think hunters not overestimate the importance, but maybe overpack on clothing. And part of that just comes down to getting out and testing and seeing what you can do with what you have. And so, like always, don't just wait for the hunt. Get out in tough conditions. Go test your rain gear. Go test your insulation pieces. Go hike in different conditions and apply what you can learn with your clothing to your next hunt. As always, appreciate you guys tuning in. If you have any questions, send an email to podcast@exomodgear.com, and for sure, check out the link in the show description for the videos and more info.